Ricky here. Before we get into today's episode, I have an announcement for Chicago-based listeners. I am having a show of my latest oil paintings at the Andersonville Galleria in the Andersonville neighborhood of Chicago for the month of April. And that is at the Andersonville Galleria in the Andersonville neighborhood of Chicago. So I hope to see you at the opening reception on Saturday, April 6th. From 4 p.m. to 8 p.m. And for more details, you can go to rickyartist.com. With that, let's get going with this week's episode. On this episode of Eager to Know, activating the creative part of your brain, why artists should consider a vampire lifestyle, and how I never fully recovered from being assaulted by a toucan at age 5. We all have a creative part of our brain, whether we use it or not, for generating new ideas, problem solving, and just viewing ourselves in this world. I am Ricky McGeckran, an artist living in Chicago, and I am eager to know and share with you all how people of a creative leaning have brought this way of thinking to the forefront and how it has shifted outcomes. The works of Chicago-based artist Robert Porazinski are characterized by adaptation, change, transformation, and mutability. I think he is an amazing artist and a wonderful friend. You are the first artist that I met when I moved to Chicago in February. I had known some artists before I moved here, but we met under circumstances that had nothing to do with art, and then we ended up realizing that we were both artists and we actually live in the same neighborhood. So I think we were destined to be here and have this conversation.
Yeah, I know. It was kind of funny that your first studio space was with David Joseph.
Yep.
And obviously David's a really good friend of mine,
Yep.
as well as Brad, who's
Yep.
also an artist. And yeah, so it was just this sort of connection that happened immediately.
And it was a lesson that Chicago is really small, because I thought I was coming to this giant city, and then I realized very quickly it's really small.
Yeah, definitely. Especially among artists,
Yeah.
I think it's a very tight-knit
Totally.
community.
Absolutely.
And yeah, everybody seems to know everybody,
Yeah.
which I think is a good thing.
It is a good thing. It's a very good
A
thing.
great support network. And
Yeah.
I think, really, all the artists I know are just incredibly generous,
Yep.
I would say.
Mhm.
And they are always willing to help, with advice or encouragement.
Yep.
I think it's a really good community. I don't know if other cities are the same way.
Yeah.
I've lived in Chicago my whole life, so
Okay.
I don't have anything to compare to.
Yeah.
But it's,
Yeah. I wasn't tapped into the artist community. I was kind of a lone wolf in Boston. And when I got here, I felt like I was welcomed with open arms to everybody. And it is tight-knit. And I think that's really important, obviously, because we work often very solo. We're
it's very
ourselves.
isolating.
We're by ourselves. And so it's important to be able to have people that you can connect with for a lot of reasons, to bounce ideas off to get support. I'm an extreme extrovert, so it's important for me to be connected with people in general.
Right.
But in what I'm doing for work, it's very important for me to connect with people.
It is. And I think you're the exception for a lot of artists, that you're very extroverted, because I always associate artists as being very introverted. And,
I think you're
making
right.
that
Yeah.
motion to extra effort to go out and meet people and talk about their work. And I think a lot of times artists don't do that.
Yeah.
And definitely need to do it more.
Yeah. Particularly when it comes to the ideas of promoting your work. And promoting work and marketing yourself and things like that. I definitely, as I get to know more artists, I'm realizing that seems to be a common, characteristic, is that oftentimes they want to focus on the creative process alone. And they're not really thrilled about all that other stuff that sometimes needs to be done.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I mean, you're working on sort of both sides of the fence with that. You're creating things and you're selling them and you're promoting them and you're taking care of all the aspects.
Yeah.
And actually, I just saw this. It was posted. Jerry Saltz, the art critic, I think it's for the New York Times or New Yorker, just posted something about 30 tips for artists or how to be an artist. And basically said one of them was that artists need to be vampires.
Okay.
Meaning that they need to stay up late and sort of congregate with their own kind and just talk about art, their work, each other's work. And there were a lot of other points there, obviously, too, which I encourage someone to Google it and look for those points because just some very solid advice, I think, to all artists.
So maybe we can make that happen. We can have some sort of some all-night den where we can have all of our artist friends together. So actually, that's kind of what. So I invited you to an artist social that I did, which, by the way, I'm having another one in January. So
I think we ended up talking about cooking most of the time.
We didn't talk about art at all. Actually, we didn't talk about art. It
doesn't have to go that way.
So yeah, so we had. I think we talked about the food, but that's totally cool.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, I think it's important. I think that idea that you. That this guy's sharing about getting artists together, even if you're not talking about art, just being in that energy, I think is really important. So I wanted to ask you about, because the one thing I don't know, well, there's many things about you that I don't know, but one of them that is important to me is when you started producing artwork. Were you like the artsy kid? Were you not the artsy kid?
I definitely was the artsy kid.
Okay.
In grammar school, all through grammar school, if something needed to be done, something needed to be drawn, if there was some play that needed a backdrop or something.
Robert was the kid that was assigned to
I
it?
was the one that was volunteered.
Oh.
Yeah. So, I mean, I loved that. I mean, because I guess it's a way that you feel special somehow.
Yeah.
So,
did the other kids know that like when these things would come up, like something needed to be drawn, did they all think, oh, Robert?
Yeah,
Robert would be dispatched on that.
Pointed to me.
Oh.
So I loved that. Yeah.
Yeah.
That was awesome. And actually, I was just thinking about a picture of me when I was literally 1 year old with my sister on the floor drawing with coloring books.
Okay.
I was in my diapers, and it goes that far back.
All
really,
right.
for me that
Wow.
I really have drawn my whole life.
Okay.
I was obsessed with Walt Disney when I was in grade school.
Really?
And just, the movies, and that was my big goal, was to be an animator.
To be an animator, really?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Did you ever do any animation? Like, did you ever do cartooning, or did you do fool around with animation?
I did when I was still at the Art Institute. One of my co-op jobs was with a place called Sinnott and Associates, and I don't think they exist anymore, but they produced a lot of animated cartoons and, well, really commercials.
Yep.
Captain Crunch commercials were a big thing for them. McDonald's
Oh,
was.
really? Okay.
And so I worked on, in the old days, people actually painted cells.
What? Did you paint cells?
Yeah, so I painted.
Oh my God, that's so cool. For what were these used for?
Well, these were Captain Crunch commercials. And then the McDonald's project.
And by the way, according to Captain Crunch's like his lapel, he's actually not a captain. I think he's a colonel. So I'm just throwing that out there.
So there was a technical.
Well, I think so.
There.
The animators had a mistake because whatever, I don't know all the details.
Wasn't the proper uniform.
Whatever the number of stripes are not captain.
Okay.
So you may want to make some phone calls to those people that you worked with and let them know.
Don't know where any of them are now, but that's a fun detail. Does Captain Crunch still exist? Doesn't it?
I hope so. It was delicious.
I remember Crunch Berries, and couldn't get enough of those.
So I was recently speaking to someone who lived in Europe, and they don't have all of those cereals, like all those American.
Oh, really?
Whatever. No, all those like whatever Kellogg's or General Mills cereals.
Boxes of sugar.
And so they actually have restaurants where you get a bowl of crunch berries. I don't know if it was in Finland. It was someone I was speaking to like in the last 2 weeks. And it was like some Northern European country. And yeah, you go to and they charge a lot. And you go and you can you can get crunch berries, Count Chocula, all of that stuff that we grew up with is hard to get.
Thing there.
It's a thing there. There's a thing there.
Well, yeah, a bowl of crunch berries would be incredible. That was the best part. So
I was a Fruity Pebbles. No, I'm sorry. Not Fruity Pebbles. A Fruit Loops fan until Toucan Sam.
Oh yeah.
Okay, so Toucan Sam, love Toucan Sam, love Fruit Loops. I went to the Stone Zoo in Massachusetts. I was probably 5 years old, and they had an aviary, and there was a toucan sitting on the railing of the aviary, and I thought it was Toucan Sam, and I went up, and he bit me. Oh. And I was traumatized, and I haven't eten Fruit Loops since.
Well, that's a terribly traumatic story, Rick. Sorry that had to happen to you. It
did happen.
Yeah, I ate so much sugar as a child. I'm surprised I'm still alive.
So Walt Disney, did you ever watch that documentary about, it was a very extensive documentary about Walt Disney's life. I don't remember who produced it. It was like
I kind of
4 hours long.
I don't know if I saw the whole thing, but I remember seeing parts of that.
Okay.
Yeah.
So the thing about him that I didn't fully connect until I watched this is how he was successful in so many areas because, obviously he was an animator.
Right.
And then he did this, he was so passionate about animation and what it could be that he actually made the first full-length movie, which was Snow White, which no one had even, like the concept of doing that.
I know, that was just unheard of.
It was unheard of. Yeah. And not only that, the amount of work to do that, because like you were talking about the process of like painting, I don't know what it is.
Cells. And I know Snow White, I don't know how many it was per second, but it was a huge amount so that it looked very smooth and sort of, flawless. And there was just this smooth motion through the whole thing. And he was just incredibly forward thinking in so many ways. Yeah. With the idea of coming up with an amusement park.
Well, that was the other thing is because he did this animation thing, and then he did an amusement park, which that has nothing to do with animation.
Right.
That's a completely new,
certainly on that level. Yeah. Where it was this, not some carnival rides. It was, just
it was
the scope of anything else that was done
an
before.
Immersive experience, which I've never been there. Have you been to
Oh
Disneyland?
Yeah. I mean, as I said in grade school, Disney was everything to me. Yeah. So going to Disney World was just the ultimate.
Yeah.
There was a book at the library. It was a gigantic book. I mean, it must have weighed like 25 pounds. Called The Art of Walt Disney.
Oh, with the big white one.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, I remember that.
And I think I would just check that book out constantly. I probably had that book more than anybody else. Nobody else could get it.
Yeah.
I would just constantly check that book out. It was incredible.
So does that include, is that everything? Is that just animation, or does it also talk about parks and movies and everything?
Yeah, I mean, I think it went up to like late 1960s.
Oh, okay. So did post Disneyland.
Yeah, so it definitely went into Disneyland, Disney World, and all those aspects. So
one of the challenges that we have as artists, as we probably not only have to be creative, but we probably have to be a little bit of not a business person, but you have to use that side of your brain. It's like the left side and the right side. And I know for me personally, like I'm okay in both, but it's hard to switch. Like I either have like, okay, today is a planning day or today is a painting day. Or do you have a similar experience?
I don't think I really divided up that consciously.
Yep.
I certainly have days where I'm going to be focused on creating artwork.
Yep.
And I kind of think after I create something that I feel I need to promote it. And that's more of a conscious effort that, I need to post this, on Instagram or Facebook, or say something about it. Or
So do you feel like that's part of the creative process?
yeah, I think it's
It's
necessary now that you just sort of have to really be conscious of putting your work out there so people could see it. And I mean, there's so much out there. I mean, my Instagram feed for me, it's just galleries and other artists that I follow.
Yeah.
And I think I do it just because it is inspirational to me to just sort of look through that.
To
and
look
I
through
see
stuff. Yeah.
all the stuff that's going on. And in a way, it's overwhelming, but it is inspiring. I mean, you look through that stuff and you think like, oh, I got to get going. I need to really start producing.
Yeah. That can feel very, sometimes that can make me feel a little panicky. Like,
Yeah.
I need to get going because all these other people are doing all
it's
this
like, look
stuff.
at all the stuff that's going on.
Yeah. Whereas people, before social media, I think artists had the luxury of being in their own little, we talked about working by yourself,
Right.
and you could just focus on your stuff, and not really not have a viewpoint necessarily on what everyone else is doing.
Right.
Because sometimes it can be distracting. Sometimes I think it can be
Right.
inspiring. So getting back to like the process, how like sharing is part of, is that kind of exciting? Like I finished this piece of work and I'm excited to get it out there in the world to see people's reaction type of thing. Is that kind of how you think about it?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think it serves as sort of a sounding board.
Mm-hmm.
You could, I guess, read what kind of reaction you're getting from it,
Yep.
And that could be positive or negative.
Or nothing.
Or nothing.
Nothing. Usually it's nothing. It's a bad sign.
Yeah. I mean, usually it's something, but yeah, some are certainly better than others, and those stand out,
Do you usually know?
Oh, before you're posting it?
Yeah. Do you usually know, or do you have does your gut tell you, or are you
sure,
sometimes surprised?
You have a sense that, oh, this is a really strong piece.
Yeah.
And, I'm sure this is going to have to get a good reaction.
Yes.
Although in terms of selling, I've read articles from people about Instagram and them selling so much work on Instagram. And I have to say that I don't think I've ever even had someone inquire about a price or to that extent. So
Okay.
I mean, they'll make comments about it or
Yep.
that sort of thing. So that's a whole aspect that I don't really fully understand.
Is how to
how people sell work through Instagram.
Oh, okay.
Um,
Well, maybe I will have a guest on here who
could
has
reveal those
successfully
secrets.
done that, and we can both learn. I'll invite you, and you
Yeah.
can be part of the conversation. I think that could be fun because I don't know how that's done either.
yeah, I mean, I think it's really a lot of invested time of following certain people, looking at other people that are successful doing it, look at who's following them, and and it becomes this sort of, I don't know, developing some matrix or something of, I don't know, it's mystical.
Yeah, no, I agree. I totally agree with you. I was just talking to somebody else for another podcast that I was recording, and we talked about when you're encountered with a challenge, one of the things that both of us would talk about that we did is we would find someone who does that rather than trying to figure it out on your own.
Right.
So I think that in this situation that you're talking about, basically extending, using Instagram in a way that we're being successful in a way that we're currently not,
right,
is finding someone who's doing it and learn from them rather than trying to figure it out.
Right.
I think that might be a good thing to do.
Yeah, because I mean, obviously, at this point, galleries are not as important as they once were.
Yeah.
There's just so many other outlets, ways for people to get their work out there, and galleries. I think there are a number of galleries that still want to believe it's the early 20th century and kind of want to have that control over their artists. And I don't think that's realistic anymore.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Without naming names, I know.
Okay. Well, I have an idea that I have an idea of something that could be new. This is something that I saw in Boston, in I think it was the Hyde Park neighborhood of Boston, and this is probably something that's common, but I've never seen it before. It was basically I don't know what you call it, but we would get like a bunch of artists together, and we would just rent out the space, so we could do it on Clark Street,
sort of a pop-up gallery.
Yeah, but
space?
It's permanent. And we just pay. We all split the
Oh,
rent.
so okay, it was a permanent space that you rented.
Permanent space.
Okay.
And we all, we all split the rent, and then we take turns manning the store.
Mm-hmm.
And so each one of us has to work it X number of hours, and then, we could, we each get 100% of our sale revenue. We just simply pay for the rent and whatever common expenses are. And we would just split the time. So we will have to talk about that.
That's
I think
an
that
interesting idea.
I think that could be interesting.
How many artists participated
Well, we would have
in
to.
this?
I think this one had. I'm gonna guess about 20.
Okay.
I think it was about 20 artists, and I know
That's
that
good.
I remember speaking to them. I should probably I'll set up a web page for this podcast, and I'll probably put Maybe I'll put their website on there. But I spoke to them like the last night. It was one of my going away dinners in Boston, and they were right next to the restaurant. And I went in, and I remember talking to this woman. But I had so much going on when I was moving here the next day, so I kind of forgot about it. But my good friend from Boston who was with me that night, he mentioned it. He's like, Rick, have you ever done anything about that? So it's something that I'm thinking about.
Yeah.
So we should... Our gang of artists that we talk about, our vampires.
Right.
We should
can assemble and
we should
put something together
and look at maybe doing something like that.
Yeah, I like that idea. Yeah, definitely. And I think 20, if you could get 20 artists, I think that's a great number.
Yeah.
I think that's really the number that galleries should represent, and I think they tend to go way beyond that sometimes.
Oh, too many.
And it's just too many, and they can't really devote attention to anybody then.
Yeah.
And so I think that might be a good number.
Let's do it ourselves.
Yeah.
We'll just do it ourselves.
Yeah.
So I'm sure people are probably always asking you, or maybe they're not, like, where do you get your inspiration, Robert? But your stuff is so, it's very varied, which I love. And so, I mean, can you talk a little bit about that? I know you do like collections of stuff that's all kind of the same thing,
right?
And then you will shift on to something completely different.
Gears.
Can you tell me about like where that comes from?
I'll say that I really get inspiration from a lot of different things. I mean, certainly, looking, as I said, at other people's work, if it's going on, and, being inspired by that. But I mean, even just walking in the neighborhood,
yes,
there's so much to see. I have to say, honestly, just walking through alleys and seeing collections of garbage.
Absolutely.
If it's
totally
metal, like collections of metal or something, like HVAC, like ductwork or something. I was into ductwork for a while, which is strange. I mean, just collections of leaves or branches.
Completely.
I'll even create models a lot of times.
What do you mean models?
Well,
like prototypes?
Sort of prototypes, that I'm working to paint from.
Okay.
And a lot of them initially kind of looked sort of plant flower-like, and it would just be creating cutouts of paper with printouts on them. Okay. And sticking them in a styrofoam ball. So, I mean, it's just very low tech.
Okay.
So.
And would this be source for a two-dimensional piece of artwork?
Yeah.
Or for the three? Okay. So for a two-dimensional.
So it's really the inspiration for a two-dimensional piece. Okay. But it was a way of creating something that was unusual or surprising to me. And actually from that, just from those cutout shapes, at one point, I happened to just see them laying on the ground, and just sort of that random scattered look that they had was an inspiration for a lot of other pieces that I did that happened after that.
Okay.
So, I mean, a lot of the inspiration comes from, I think, just doing the work and being in your studio and finding things accidentally and looking at how something happens that
Yeah.
you didn't expect to see.
So that's interesting. So I can completely relate to what you said about things falling on the floor and how that is like making connections in your brain that you would
Right.
want to extend that, or like an alleyway. Completely get that. Like I see
Yeah.
sunlight reflections on objects, and I'm like, oh my god, that's so interesting. So
Yeah.
is that something that um, do you think that's something that only some people have, or do you think people have that and they don't exercise it? Is it something that requires development?
I think, I mean, it's probably something that artists do just because that's where our heads are at, that we just look at things from some other perspective, maybe, and
Yes.
look at things that other people don't notice, and
Correct.
see the beauty in them or the interesting thing about that thing. And it's so I think people could be maybe trained to do it, to
Okay.
notice those things and look for those oddball curiosities that you come across every day that are always in front of you.
But they're interesting.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I do think that. Um, yeah, I definitely think so. Starting, so that way of seeing the world for me started when I bought a camera, because
Okay.
then I
Yeah.
was, because I fooled around with. I mean, I was like an artsy kid, but it was more like, um, it was more about creating stuff out of my brain as opposed to observing the world in the way that we just described
Right.
and kind of getting inspired. And I kind of was just going through the world like most people do and sort of taking things, viewing things for sort of in a normal way. It didn't come out right, but it wasn't until when I got my first real camera, and I was kind of forced to focus on composition, because that's
Right.
that's a big thing with a camera, and you sort of start slowly rewiring your brain when you're doing that to kind of see things in a different way. And then when you start drawing, but more when you start with painting, with when you have to focus on value and shapes,
Right.
and not looking at the shape of the object, but you're looking at the shape of the values.
Right.
That's where my brain really started to get rewired to see the world in a different way. And that's when I would start walking through alleys and seeing things in a different way. Do you know what I'm talking about?
Oh yeah. I mean, I think that's sort of a real fundamental thing with drawing, especially if you're doing something that's representational. When you're looking at it, you're really looking at it as shapes and these areas of color and how they relate to each other, and it's piecing all those things together. So you really are kind of flip-flopping in your head back and forth, that you're seeing it as the thing that it really is, but then also just seeing it as shapes.
Yeah. Isn't that cool?
And it's sort of seeing it in this very objective way.
It's a nice little escape kind of from the real world, when you have to kind of take yourself out of, the way that you see the world when you and I are walking down the street talking, to when we're by ourselves walking down an alley, and you can kind of, reconfigure your brain to look at things in the way that we would when you're doing a drawing like you just described.
Right.
Cool. Do you think, so what do you think about do you think painting is drawing? What do you think the relationship between drawing and painting?
I mean, I think they're really closely related, honestly. I mean, if I'm thinking back at, doing figure drawing classes.
Yeah.
And it's really the same principle. I mean, you're looking at these shapes, and you're probably doing it in black and white, but you're looking at shapes and forms and putting those things together, and, size relationships and all of that. I mean, with paint, it's just that added dimension of, now you're dealing with color theory and neutralizing colors and, working all of that out. So, but you're still fundamentally dealing with, those areas, and maybe some more with texture. There's a physical texture to paint, and so but they're very closely related, I think.
Yeah. So I took a class at the Florence Academy of Art, and it was like a workshop. So
Yeah.
it was like 6 weeks, and it was drawing and painting. But we started out with just drawing, and the way they structured it was because I had been painting and drawing and all that, but the way that they trained us during this period was we started with drawing, and then it was drawing that would lead into painting because we would be drawing, and they would force us to do everything with blocks of similar values,
Okay.
and blocks of shading. So then when we switched to painting, we basically painted those. We would paint and focus on blocks
Right.
of similar value, and it kind of rewire. It kind of made me think about painting in a different way. That drawing is very foundational. And quite frankly, it kind of expanded my view on a lot of things in life, that there are foundations that I hadn't
Right.
really paid attention to that are really important. So for instance, this sounds kind of crazy, but like that concept of drawing leading is a foundation of painting led me into stretching when I go to the gym now, because I can see as stretching as being, you can't separate it from like fitness and cardio
Okay.
and weightlifting. Like they're all part of the same thing.
Right.
And does that make sense?
Yeah. I mean, it's obviously, you're, as we were talking about earlier, there is sort of that left brain, right brain aspect to painting or being an artist, but there obviously is an underlying structure or approach that you need to sort of go through. There's a foundation of sort of learning the rules before you can break them,
Yeah.
kind of thing.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I think that's definitely true in painting as well as other things too, of course.
Yep.
Yeah. So there is that underlying foundation I think you have to have.
Yep. So in what you do every day, you are using these parts of our brain that we talked about, where we're seeing the world in a different way, or we're seeing things in a different way. We are finding interest in trying to express them. I'm not trying to describe your process, but in general, like that's kind of what you're doing. That's using parts of your thinking in your brain that are very different from most jobs. I think that in many jobs, people have the opportunity to think creatively, think differently, invent new things, maybe a little bit. And in a lot of jobs, you really don't. I think in a lot of jobs, the rules have been and the tasks have been established. And the way that you're successful is by doing the tasks correctly and doing a lot of the tasks,
Right.
doing more tasks than the person next to you,
Right.
type of thing.
I guess I would associate it with, I would say that in certain professions, say you're a lawyer.
Yep.
And I think this has to do with, where you're going to be successful or not successful, that
Yep.
sort of thing. But if you're a lawyer, you sort of follow this path of things, you get this certain degree, you get, a job with a certain law firm, and you follow this path, and it's going to equal this success.
Yep.
By doing these things. And for artists, it's really not the same.
Mm-hmm.
There is no real clear path.
Mm-hmm.
Everyone's story is different.
Yep.
If you look at, artists that are maybe like really super financially successful, there's no one story for any of those people.
Yep.
It happens in different ways.
Yep.
So for artists, I think it's always it's your own reward is your work.
Yep.
Ultimately it comes down to that.
Okay.
You have to be happy with that and find yourself in your work.
That's
And
very different from
Yeah.
a lawyer.
Yeah. Yeah. It's
Or
definitely
most
a different,
jobs.
it's a different goal,
Yeah.
I think.
Yeah.
That's its own reward, I think, for artists. I think for artists, time is also the most important thing.
What do you mean by that?
That I think that's the biggest struggle for artists, is finding the time to do their work. Because
see.
in so many cases, artists can't do that full time.
Right. Right.
So it gets pushed aside and you have to search for that time to focus on your work.
Right.
And that could be one of the biggest challenges, I think.
So this idea of your own work is your own reward. Do you have any thoughts about that mentality actually being of value to someone in a non-creative job? And the way, because when you said that, it made me think about maybe someone in a non-creative job, like maybe you're a project manager or you're a nurse or something that's not traditionally associated with creativity, but focusing on the excellence in what you're doing as opposed to focusing on
a new way of doing it.
as opposed to what?
Not necessarily a new way of doing it. If you're, someone where it's a very technical skill that you're working with, surgeons, but I think even in those jobs, there are levels of creativity. I mean, there's people that come up with new ways of doing things, as a surgeon. If you're, maybe a coder, you're coming up with new ways of doing that within a parameters of, coding.
Right.
And so, I mean, I think maybe all jobs have some aspects of creativity, depending on what level you're at, maybe, and pushing those limits, within the confines of the rules of that job.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm not sure. I think it depends on what you do. I think that there's probably, I think most people probably have to be really creative about finding creativity because of what I was just, what we were just talking about is like how performance is judged. It's really, it's pretty much set down. And, I think that definitely would be something that would be challenging.
Well, I mean, certainly I think artists, the whole point of being an artist in a lot of ways is to break the rules, is to do something that's different, to make people see something in some other new way.
Yes.
So it's sort of the fundamental element of what it is to be an artist, I think. And so that is part of the job, is breaking the rules.
Yep.
So it's definitely an area where creativity is one of the most important and valued, I think, characteristics of it.
So the point of this podcast, really, for me at this point, because I don't know where this is going to go, is to have conversations with creative leaning people. So whether it's artists or just people that I know that do things in a different way, and to try to just think about people that do jobs that aren't traditionally creative, and to get them to just talk about ways to open up people's brains and to get people to be using the part of the brain that you use every day, or that we were talking about seeing things that people see every day in a different way and trying to get that to people. I'm not sure how I'm going to do it. I think it's obviously, we're not going to be able to figure that out today. And it's probably going to take a while and a lot of conversations to figure that out. But I think I'm kind of passionate about that, because I think that all of those things that we just talked about accessing our minds in a way that is different from most people.
Right.
I think it could be really impactful and important for people.
Well, I think, if someone that isn't typically involved in the arts or any sort of creative activity, it probably would benefit anybody, to take a class in something that they're not usually familiar with. It's a potting class or painting class, drawing or making something. And I think that probably activates it.
It does activate
You
it,
know?
but people are scared of that. People always make the joke like, "Oh, I can't draw a stick figure," and
Right.
they're very hesitant to to do the class because they feel like they will look stupid or
Right.
they will and I agree with you. I think it would activate people's brain.
Yeah. So yeah, I don't think we can force anybody into it. But definitely it's something I think more people should consider. And I think it gives them probably a greater appreciation for people that do it full time.
Yeah.
And I think it's something that really everybody should do.
So do you think that people are more are ultimately can be trained to be an artist as opposed to, I mean, do you think a big is it like learning a new language, like learning French, as opposed to something that you have ingrained talent that needs to be discovered or developed?
I think, of course, I think there's certain people that are just born with innate talents and activities that they're lean towards. But I do think really anybody can switch that lever of creativity and learn how to do something, and I think really anybody can learn to draw if they're sort of pointed in the right direction of how to look at something.
Sure.
And I think anybody can become better at that.
Yep.
If they want to. And so I think it's a spectrum,
Yeah.
really. Certainly people that just have an innate gift for it.
And I would agree. I when I was living in Florence, Italy, for that workshop that I told you, I was there for 7 weeks, and obviously you've been to Florence and you see how ridiculous everything is. It's like
certainly the place to be inspired.
Yeah. And there's just so much the art is everywhere, and it is obvious that that was considered a valuable trade. And but I guess the thing that I thought of when I was there was the people that lived during the time when all of this stuff was, the time periods when this was produced, they weren't necessarily different from us. They weren't born with all of this talent. They were just like us. But it was because it was valued, I guess, in their culture, that this was considered something that is like a noble profession to be producing and to be learning. And it just made me think, like, we could be producing that same level of art right now with our current people on this planet if we value that. So it's kind of like when we talk about that spectrum, I feel like the percentage of people that actually are talented is a lot bigger than we realize, but we just don't focus on it because everyone's focusing on becoming a lawyer or a project manager.
Right. Well, that definitely goes down a whole other road about
that will be episode 2 of
what's
this.
valued, how art is valued now. I think today there's just a huge disparity. There's a very tiny percentage of artists that are highly valued.
Yeah.
And then there's everybody else.
Yeah.
And
the 1%.
Yeah, or a fraction of that percent. And in that regard, it's all about the market and the value those works have.
Yep.
And trading them like a commodity.
Yep.
Which I think that's certainly a reflection of the rest of our society, though.
Sure.
It's everything is a commodity, and there's a very few that are going to benefit from it. So yeah, I mean, I think art is still highly valued in our society, but again, it's like very disparate. Yeah.
So are there a couple things that you could share with people that are listening to this, that they can integrate that creative part of their brain in what they're currently doing?
How they can do that in their everyday life?
A couple things that they could do to activate that. I guess that was the words that you used.
I mean, I would encourage people to, they don't even have to take a class. Maybe if they just want to step out of their comfort zone and do a drawing of something of their child or their parents or whoever they want, or just some still life, or just even go for a walk like we were talking about and look at things that they wouldn't normally notice, or just took a closer look at something that just would normally just be passed by.
Yep.
And see the detail and the beauty in that.
So maybe go for a walk without your iPhone.
Right, where you're actually really looking at things.
Yeah, imagine that.
Or, like as you said, photography was sort of a bridge for you to make that step into creativity and seeing things in a different way, because it's forcing you to compose something and see something in that rectangle and create something that's a different vision than you would normally see it. That might be a great tool for people to use to do that.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah.
All right, Robert, thank you so much. This was a really great conversation. And I think there's a bunch of things that I want to continue talking to you about. So maybe we can figure out if you can come back, because this was
I
great.
would love to come back, and thank you for having me. It was a lot of fun. I really enjoyed talking. Thanks again.
All right, bye. Thanks.
Bye.
Thank you for joining me on this episode of Eager to Know. You can see Robert's work at rporazinski.com. That's rporazinski.com. You can find additional content related to my discussion with Robert at eagertoknow.com. That's eager to know with the number 2. Eager to Know is a weekly podcast.